Imagine a life that isn't defined by a single place, but by the journey itself. A world that's constantly in motion, happening just beyond our settled view. Well, this is the world of nomadic pastoralists, and for centuries, their story has been written on the move.
For hundreds and hundreds of years, these communities have moved with their herds, following this ancient rhythm that's just dictated by the seasons. They're chasing the green grass, going up to high mountain pastures in the summer and then coming back down to the foothills for the winter. It's like a masterclass in reading the land and living in perfect harmony with it.
And that right there is the core of what we're exploring today. This isn't just a story about a traditional way of life. No, it's about a massive clash between these ancient, fluid traditions and a modern world that demands fixed borders, new laws, and a totally different way of seeing the land.
To really get how this works, let's start in the mountains and plains of India, because here, these pastoral cycles were perfected into what was basically a sustainable art form, a life lived in perfect sync with the environment.
Just look at the pure logic of this annual cycle. For the Gaudy shepherds of Himachal Pradesh, this journey was a brilliant survival strategy. They would spend the winter down in the low hills, and then, as the snows melted, they'd march north to spend the summer in these beautiful high mountain meadows. This constant movement meant their flocks always had rich pasture, but it also gave the grasslands time to recover. It was a perfectly balanced, healthy ecosystem.
And this incredible adaptation wasn't just for the mountains. Not at all. In the harsh deserts of Rajasthan, communities like the Raikas perfected their own rhythm. They actually combined herding with a bit of cultivation. When the monsoon pastures dried up around October, they'd move out, searching for food and water for their camels and sheep, and they'd only come back when the rains returned.
Now, this is really important. These weren't isolated communities. They were a vital part of the wider economy. Take the Dangars in Maharashtra, for example. During the dry season, they traveled to the fertile Konkan coast. Their flocks would graze on the harvested fields, which perfectly manured the soil for the next crop. And in return, the local farmers gave them rice, a grain they couldn't grow back on the dry plateau. It was a perfect symbiotic relationship. So this was absolutely not random wandering. It was a highly sophisticated system. They had to know exactly how long to stay in one place, where the next water source was, and how to negotiate passage with all the different farming communities. Their entire world was built on this deep ecological knowledge and really complex social networks. And then, everything changed. The arrival of British colonial rule imposed a completely new, rigid logic on the land, one that just had no room for movement. This new order would pretty quickly begin to dismantle the pastoralists' entire world. You see, the colonial state saw the land through a totally different lens. This was a fundamental clash of worldviews. On one side, you have a life based on mobility and using the land in cycles. On the other, a world built on staying put and private ownership. So on cultivated grazing land, they labeled it wasteland and just gave it away to generate tax revenue. Forests that were full of food for the animals, they were declared reserved for timber, locking the pastoralists out. And the nomads themselves, they were seen as suspicious, even classified as criminal tribes back in 1871, which meant their movements were severely restricted. And to top it all off, a grazing tax was slapped on every single animal they owned.
This quote from a colonial forest officer just perfectly captures the official mindset. Grazing was seen as illegitimate. To them, the only legitimate use of a forest was for commercial timber. This worldview simply couldn't get its head around the sustainable way pastoralists had used these lands for centuries.
The consequences, well, they were devastating. Suddenly, huge grazing grounds just disappeared. Pastoralists were forced onto smaller and smaller patches of land. Of course, this led to overgrazing, which led to a decline in the quality of the pastures, which led to a deterioration of their animal stock. For so many of them, it was a complete catastrophe.
But this story wasn't just happening in India. The exact same patterns of closing off land, restricting movement, and creating a crisis, well, they were playing out for pastoral communities half a world away, all across the vast continent of Africa.
Africa is home to over half of the world's pastoral population. We're talking more than 22 million people. To really understand their story, we're going to zoom in on one of the most well-known groups, the Maasai people of Kenya and Tanzania.
Just look at that number for a second. In the late 19th century, European powers literally sliced up Africa. The result for the Maasai? They lost about 60% of their traditional pre-colonial lands. 60%. Gone.
The contrast here is just stark. Before colonialism, Moss Island was this huge open territory.
Afterwards, an international boundary cut their land in half. Their best grazing areas were taken for white settlement or turned into famous game reserves like the Serengeti, where they were totally forbidden to enter. They were pushed into this small, dry zone with unreliable rain and really poor pastures.
And this is what happens when you take away the ability to move. Traditionally, pastoralists survived drought by moving to find forage, but confined to a reserve, they were trapped. And the result was horrifying. In 1930, the Kenyan Maasai had about 720,000 cattle. After really bad drought in 33 and 34, over half of them died. They just couldn't escape.
This gut-wrenching quote from herders in Namibia, it says it all. This wasn't just an economic problem, it was an existential one. Their entire world had been enclosed. They felt like they were in jail, cut off from lands their people had used for generations. A whole way of life was being suffocated by invisible lines on a map.
But here's the thing about pastoralists. They are masters of adaptation. So despite these immense pressures, they didn't just vanish. They found ways to survive, to respond, and to carve out a place in this new, restrictive world.
And their responses were incredibly varied and resourceful. Some just reduced their herd sizes. Others, like the Raikas in India, pioneered entirely new migration routes when political partition blocked their old ones. A lot of them started combining herding with trade or wage labor. The wealthier ones actually bought land and settled down, while others started organizing politically, demanding their rights and government support.
This image just captures their new reality perfectly, doesn't it? An ancient way of life, symbolized by the shepherd and his flock, now navigating the concrete and steel of the modern world. It's such a powerful symbol of both the challenges they face and their incredible resilience.
So the key takeaway here is that pastoralism isn't some romantic, outdated lifestyle. In fact, many ecologists now recognize that in really dry and mountainous regions where farming is almost impossible, mobile pastoralism is often the most ecologically sustainable way to live.
And this leaves us with a final thought. We've seen pastoralists as people whose world was disrupted, but maybe we should see them as something more. As we all face our own environmental challenges, maybe there are profound lessons we can learn from these original masters of adaptation. Communities who perfected the art of living lightly on the land and understanding the deep rhythms of nature. The question is, are we ready to listen?